If you want to know the secrets of existence and the true meaning of life, I can't help you. But if you want some book recommendations, why not try reading the ones I wrote? If you're a fan of giant monster mayhem and anime weirdness, why not try Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1? If horror is more your style, you can't go wrong with The Occult Mafia. Those who enjoy their fantasy with a dark twist may be interested in Emerald of Maddox City. And if you're interested in shared universes, why not read all three? Hop on down to the description for links to all three books on Amazon. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Omni viewer, and welcome to Omni at the Movies, where today's subject is Space Jam: A New Legacy. Now, of course, I'm the sort of person who is old enough to have grown up with the original Space Jam, and I am a lifelong Looney Tunes fan. As you can tell from looking around, the Godzilla isn't my only thing, as you can plainly see, but the Looney Tunes in particular, that's something I have strong feelings for. Because I don't know why, I've always felt a deeper connection with the Looney Tunes. I liked Disney well enough when I was a kid, but there was just something about Bugs and Daffy and all those guys that spoke to me more. And yes, as a kid, I really liked the original Space Jam. Having revisited it as an adult, it's not as good as I remember. It's very bland as far as Looney Tunes stuff goes. Has its moments, but it's obvious that it was as shallow as the commercials it was based on. But apparently there's a lot of nostalgia for it because this new movie isn't a Looney Tunes movie, it's a Space Jam movie. So clearly they are banking on nostalgia with this. So how is this one? Well, in some ways it's a step up from the original Space Jam, but given what a long flight of stairs you can make out of the Looney Tunes property, that's still a step that's very close to the bottom and still very far away from the top. I may as well tell you some of the things it does right. For starters, LeBron James has a bit more of an arc in this. Whereas in the original Space Jam, Michael Jordan is just sort of floating through. You might even say he's not a very proactive protagonist. LeBron actually has something to do here. He has room to grow. Whereas Michael Jordan didn't really have room to grow. He was just sort of the savior figure. LeBron actually does have an arc. It's not the best arc, but I'm talking about the positives right now. So LeBron has more of an arc than Jordan did. That's a plus. The villain in this movie, Algae Rhythm, also has more motivation than Swackhammer did in the original Space Jam. Whereas in the original Space Jam, Swackhammer's grand plan was to capture the Looney Tunes, who for some reason live in the center of the Earth, and make them theme park attractions. I mean, that's not much in terms of stakes, and it didn't really seem to matter all that much in the long run. But Algae Rhythm actually has... He's got more of a reason, more of a motivation that you can understand. And he also is perhaps one of the best embodiments of the dark side of the internet that I have seen Hollywood ever cop to, really. Like, if you watch the documentary The Creepy Line, and then you watch Space Jam: A New Legacy, you will see the connection there. So, the villain is also a bit of an improvement. I will also say that, surprisingly, the 3D photoreal versions of the Looney Tunes don't look that bad. Like, it's kind of surreal at first, but they went with the Detective Pikachu approach of sticking with the original designs and just saying, what if they had texture? What if they were three-dimensional like this? And surprisingly, it works. In fact, I think they look a little bit better 3D than they do 2D in some cases. Like, in the 2D versions in this movie, their eyelids have this weird sheen on them that I'm not sure why that was added. It doesn't look right. It's gone in the 3D models. I mean, I prefer the 2D Looney Tunes, of course, but if they were going to make them 3D, I guess they could have done much worse. Although it also kind of feels like they didn't fully explore that. Like, when they first get the upgrade, as Algae calls it, from 2D to 3D, Bugs sees what happened to him and he goes, oh no, like this is the worst possible thing that could have happened. Why? I don't know. I really don't know. I guess Bugs is just a traditionalist. But I don't know. Like I said, I'm talking about the positives first. The CG that they applied to the Looney Tunes, it was good. I don't know if it would have been as good had it been made like 5 or 10 years ago, but for this purpose, it works. Also, they try to give Bugs a bit of an arc as well to go alongside LeBron's, but since this is clearly a LeBron movie, it doesn't quite get as much attention. They at least tried. Like, Bugs' whole motivation is getting the gang back together, and he's sort of using LeBron as an excuse. Actually, that's another slight improvement over the original. A lot of people have criticized the original Space Jam because the Looney Tunes are asking Michael Jordan for help in that one. And you gotta think, they're the Looney Tunes. Can't they just solve this problem on their own? And yes, they could have. It didn't make any sense. But here it's LeBron getting help from the Looney Tunes. And that makes more sense. They still ultimately give the big hero moment to LeBron James, but it makes more sense that he would need help from the Looney Tunes rather than the Looney Tunes needing help from him. And that's about all the positive I have to say about this. The thing about Space Jam: A New Legacy isn't so much that it is aggressively bad as it is just kind of dull and boring. You may have also heard a lot of people say the original Space Jam was kind of dull and boring, especially compared to other stuff in the Looney Tunes legacy. And in terms of the sequel, well, it's basically the same, and in a way I guess that makes it a proper sequel to the original, if you can call that a compliment, but that doesn't really make it a good film, just because it's like the original. It's every bit as bland, and in fact, it feels like they try to go meta with the whole holding back and not letting the Looney Tunes be themselves until the halfway point of the game. And I get what they were going for, but the fact of the matter is, in order to do that, you have to restrain the Looney Tunes and keep them from doing what they're supposed to do until midway through the game. That's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, where it's like, you want to tell this story about how the Looney Tunes should be allowed to just be themselves, but in order to do that, you have to keep them from being themselves for a good chunk of it. There's just no way around that unless you choose to tell a completely different story, and maybe they should have. At least the Looney Tunes were doing their own thing throughout the original Space Jam. Even if it didn't always work, they were still on point in terms of being cartoon characters and not trying to be basketball players. So that's something that works against the film. Also have to talk about the acting. I don't really follow basketball, so I don't know that much about LeBron James as a player. I do know that he's really not an actor. Even though he's playing himself, that doesn't change anything. There's sort of a myth out there, or at least there used to be, where a person who cannot act can still be in a performance if that person is playing him or herself. It's not true. It still requires you to act. And LeBron is, I guess he's at least trying. He's trying to act, and they even have a line in there where they're trying to be self-aware, in which he himself says, "Athletes acting, that never works out." Got a little bit of a chuckle out of me, but it's not so much being self-aware about what the film is doing and more drawing attention to one of its problems. I'm sorry, LeBron, you can't act. I know you were giving it your all, but you're not an actor. I think you know it, but still. And voice acting in particular, he's even worse at. him, and you may have actually heard that Zendaya is the voice of Lola Bunny, and that was like an 11th hour casting. Katie Soucie actually reprised her role. She recorded all of her lines for Lola, but for some reason they decided to replace her and have Zendaya come in and record all of it. The others, as far as I know, that was always the original casting, and, you know, they got some celebrities to play certain characters, they cast the regular voice actors to play others, but LeBron and Zendaya really do stand out, and not in a good way. With LeBron, it circles back to how, again, he's not an actor. And there are times where it feels like when he's supposed to be shouting really loud, it sounds sort of like anyone who's made a YouTube video or tried recording anything would know what this is like. When you're trying to sound like you're being loud, but there are other people you're not trying to disturb, so you're trying to be very quiet but sound like you're shouting. Ah! Kind of like that. It doesn't sound very good. But for Zendaya, Zendaya actually is an actor. That's the thing, though. Just because you are an actor doesn't necessarily mean you are a voice actor. I've got nothing against Zendaya. I mean, I didn't really like her portrayal of MJ in the new MCU Spider-Man movies, but that's about how the character is portrayed. That's not to do with her. She's playing the role really well. But when it comes to voice acting just requires a different set of skills than regular acting. When you are acting and all of you can be seen, you have different tools at your disposal. You can gesticulate, you can make expressions, you can maybe just convey something very subtly through your eyes. There are things like that. But when you're voice acting, it's all here. Everything you've got has to come through your throat and out your mouth. Your voice has to have personality. It's not just about affecting a silly voice. You've got to convey everything through here. And sure, when you're in the recording booth, you can gesticulate and do stuff, and maybe that can get incorporated into the animation. But even so, it's all got to start with the voice box. Zendaya isn't necessarily giving a bad performance, again, but she just doesn't have that much personality in her voice. It sounds like she's using her regular voice, maybe just slightly affected, but it still just sounds like her, and it doesn't have that much personality. In the first Space Jam, again, Lola didn't really have much of a character, as most people point out, and I'll get more on to the subject of Lola in a second. But as far as voice acting goes, sure, she was kind of flat as a character, definitely not in design, but her voice still had personality. It could go up and down. She could convey certain things. Here, there's just not much to it. Though, maybe that has to do with the writing. Since I'm on the subject of Lola, I may as well stay on that course. Let's start with the redesign, because that was the big controversy at first. Lola was redesigned from her original appearance to be quote-unquote desexualized. And just on its own, the design isn't that good, because the thought, I guess, was to try and make her look more athletic, but she doesn't really look athletic. I mean, we have athletes to compare her to, certainly, in this movie. Yes, female ones who show up. But this design doesn't make her look athletic, it makes her look more adolescent. In fact, there are some instances and some angles where she just looks like when Bugs dresses in drag. So it wasn't really the best idea, I don't think. If they wanted to desexualize her visually, they could have done a better job. And also there's this weird detail where even though they completely altered her body to not look sexual, her face still looks like she's heavily made up, like she has a little hint of blush in her fur even. It feels incongruous in a way. But the redesign isn't necessarily the big deal. No, the bigger deal is whether or not Lola actually has a personality. And I don't mean to rub my street cred in anyone's face, but like I said, I'm a lifelong Looney Tunes fan. I have followed the Looney Tunes my entire life. I have experienced every new bit of media with them, at least in passing. Like, I didn't religiously watch Baby Looney Tunes. That is a toddler's show, but while I'd be channel surfing, I'd come across some clips, I'd land on them for a little bit just to see what they were like, get an idea so I would at least be informed for moments such as this. But I know how the Looney Tunes have progressed. And so I know that Lola has progressed as a character since 1996. She started off in the first movie as the strong, independent woman type, / girlfriend for Bugs, which makes her a little less independent, but whatever. She didn't really have much going for her in that original film, certainly not as a Looney Tune, but there was potential there. The most interesting part of a house isn't necessarily the concrete foundation, it's what you build on top of it. And sometimes that's how characters have to be. Lola did progress. It took a while, because she was kind of a background character for a little bit, except in a couple issues of the comics that DC prints. But then, when the Looney Tunes show came out, everything changed. I don't like the Looney Tunes show. I can fault that show for a number of things, but how it fixed Lola isn't one of them. That's what really cemented her as the female Looney Tune, at least the regular female Looney Tune who wasn't Granny or Penelope or any of those characters. And after that came new Looney Tunes, in which she didn't really have that many appearances, but at the same time, she had basically graduated to being female Bugs Bunny. But not just... That was more in terms of role than in terms of just making Bugs a woman. She was still her own distinct character with her own distinct voice and her own distinct set of tricks. So, I know for a fact that Lola progressed, and she was already technically desexualized by the time we got to New Looney Tunes. Well before then, in fact. So, my concern when I was reading those initial interviews about their motivation for redesigning Lola in this film weren't so much because I wanted to see a cartoon sex symbol, but rather because I was worried they were going to hit the reset button with her and act as if they were making this movie in 1998 and the original Space Jam was all they had to go on. That is exactly what happened. This new Lola's redesign is not the worst thing about her, but rather the fact that they took all the progress that had been done with Lola up to that point and just wiped it all away. And sure, you can say whatever you want about people not knowing about the other Looney Tunes stuff that came in between. I don't really care. That's still progress. You still had more to work with, and the filmmakers chose not to. Instead, just reducing Lola back to what she was. Maybe with just a little bit more of a personality, because she shows that heroic moment of being focused entirely on herself during the Wonder Woman Amazon trials, which for some reason Wonder Woman isn't part of DC world, but whatever. And when she hears that LeBron's son is in danger, she stops and goes to help them, even though that means she's failed the trial. But that's still not much. It still feels like original Lola. And original Lola wasn't the best version of Lola. That is the problem. And anyone down in the comments who says that I'm just upset because I'm a closet furry who is upset that she no longer has breasts, well, those are the people you will know didn't watch the video all the way to the end, or at least not to this point. Beyond that, though, the biggest issue with this film is that it's basically just an HBO Max advertisement. Like, it feels like more of a commercial than the original Space Jam. There's product placement everywhere. There are prominently featured characters from other Warner Brothers owned properties, prominent displays of Game of Thrones and Harry Potter and Hanna-Barbera and King Kong and Iron Giant and all sorts of other things that you can watch on HBO Max if you subscribe today. And it feels like that's the movie's primary goal. Yes, they try to weave it into the plot. Yes, they try to make the algorithm that runs this whole thing the villain, but that doesn't change anything. It still just feels like it's advertising. It doesn't feel like it's a proper story. There's very little artistry here. It's all commercialism. And look, I don't want to turn this into a whole capitalism versus socialism sort of thing, but I do believe that there's a middle ground there. Something can just be a blatant commercial, something can be 100% artsy-fartsy, but there is a middle ground to be found where you can marry those two and have it feel more natural. Space Jam: A New Legacy does not do that. And it honestly does feel like it's just one big advertisement for HBO Max. And that's a huge disappointment. Not even its attempts to be self-aware about it really come across as sincere. It feels more like it feels like an attempt to be self-aware that's not really aware of what self-awareness is. Like, there are actually these Warner executives at the beginning of the movie who are trying to convince LeBron to be part of this whole thing, and they're portrayed as being so clearly out of touch that they turn their opinions on a dime and just don't know what they're talking about. It feels like those kind of people made this film. Kind of ironically. But actually, no. I mean ironically in terms of the fact that those people would have made this film, not that those people made the film ironically. Can't believe I have to specify that these days. But, yeah, as Looney Tunes go, Space Jam: A New Legacy is not worth it, I don't think. I dare say it's actually more forgettable than the original Space Jam, even with some of the stuff that it does better. It's just bland. That's the thing. For all the stuff that it does that is an improvement, it doesn't really improve in the areas that it really needed to. I still maintain that if you're going to do a live-action animation hybrid film with these characters, Looney Tunes Back in Action is the best one. I still stand by that movie, but this just doesn't work. It's not aggressively bad, like I said. It's just bland. And that's especially weird given how Looney Tunes cartoons, also on HBO Max, is even more bizarre than anything the Looney Tunes have done before. Like, Season 2 recently dropped some episodes. They're going for straight-up nightmare fuel in some of those things. You can sort of tell that the people who worked on Ren and Stimpy in the past are now working on Looney Tunes. Oh, by the way, Elmer got his guns back. I'll be doing a video on that fairly soon. But compared to what the Looney Tunes have been doing right up until the release of Space Jam: A New Legacy, this feels like a huge step backwards. So, yeah, Space Jam: A New Legacy is just... It's not the Looney Tunes movie we need. Given where society is, though, maybe it's the Looney Tunes movie we deserve, but... No, I wouldn't even say that. We deserve better. The Looney Tunes deserve better. But it is what it is. I don't see it having the same sort of legacy, if you will, as the original. And people will probably not even be talking about it by the end of the year. Anyway, that's just where I stand on the matter. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni viewer saying that's all, folks.
If you enjoyed what you just saw, hop on down to the description for links to Patreon, DeviantArt, and all of our social media, as well as links for Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, and Emerald of Maddox City, 3 original novels I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.